The rain slammed against the tall windows of Morello's, blurring the city lights into streaks of silver and gold. The kind of upscale Italian restaurant my husband, Daniel, loved because it made him feel important, successful, superior. I sat at our usual corner table, my fingers wrapped around a wine glass I hadn't touched, watching him laugh with his friends across from me. That laugh. Sharp, cutting, performative. It used to make my heart flutter. That night, it made my stomach tighten. Honestly, Lena's sweet. She really is, Daniel said casually, slicing into his steak, his tone light, as if he weren't dissecting my worth in front of strangers. But she's just not on my level anymore. I mean, she manages IT systems. I'm closing multi-million-dollar property deals. At some point, ambition matters. His colleague Mark nodded sympathetically. You've outgrown her, man. That happens. I kept my face perfectly neutral. 15 years of marriage teaches you how to smile while bleeding internally. Another woman at the table, Claire, leaned forward conspiratorially. What about that lawyer you've been working with? Sophie Hartwell, right? She seems more aligned with your lifestyle. Daniel's jaw tightened, just for half a second. Sophie, he said, swirling his drink. She's just a colleague, but yeah, she gets it. Drive, success, standards. That was the moment I didn't suspect. I knew. The softness in his voice when he said her name, the unconscious smile, the way he didn't look at me. My husband was having an affair. I set my fork down carefully and lifted my eyes to the table. Conversation died instantly. They all realized I had heard everything. You're right, I said calmly, surprising even myself. Daniel does deserve someone at his level. I reached into my handbag and placed 2 manila envelopes on the white tablecloth between the breadbasket and his wine glass. His face drained of color. Lena, what is this? The first envelope, I said evenly, contains divorce papers, filed this afternoon. A sharp inhale. The second, I continued, is the deed transfer for the house. It's being donated to charity tomorrow morning. The table erupted in chaos. You can't do this, Daniel snapped, standing so fast his chair scraped loudly against the marble floor. I rose calmly, placed cash on the table, and met his eyes. Oh, I already did. I turned toward the exit, lighter than I'd felt in months, while behind me his voice rose into panic, glass shattering, questions spilling, control slipping. Outside, the rain had stopped. For the first time in years, the air felt clean. I was 39 years old when my marriage ended, but the truth is, it had been dying quietly for years. My name is Elena Hartwell. I work in digital systems architecture, what most people casually call IT. I build secure infrastructures for companies that can't afford mistakes. Banks, hospitals, government contractors. It's invisible work, quiet work, the kind that only gets noticed when something breaks. Daniel hated that about my job. We met when we were both 24, back when ambition looked like potential instead of ego. He was charming in a restless way. Big plans, big gestures, always talking about the future like it was something he could conquer if he just moved fast enough. I was steadier, quieter. I listened more than I spoke. He told me once that was what he loved about me. She grounds me, he used to say to people, his arm wrapped around my waist. She keeps me human. We married 3 years later. A modest ceremony, nothing flashy. Daniel wanted more, but at the time he didn't yet have the life that required an audience. The first few years were good. Not perfect, but real. Late nights on the couch, shared takeout, laughing over burnt dinners. When his real estate career started taking off, I supported him in every way I knew how. I handled finances, I optimized schedules, I quietly absorbed stress so he could shine. I didn't mind being the background, at least not at first. As his success grew, so did his world, and I noticed how little space there was left for me in it. His colleagues' wives were loud, glamorous, always dressed for attention. They talked about brunches, charity boards, designer renovations. I talked about data breaches and system failures. Daniel stopped asking about my day. When I spoke, he smiled politely, the way people do when they're waiting for you to finish. His friends started making jokes. Still fixing computers? Must be nice to have such a simple job. Daniel never corrected them. That was the first sign. I ignored it. The second sign came when he stopped inviting me to events, work dinners, networking parties, client functions. "It's not really your scene," he'd say lightly. "You'd be bored." What he meant was, "You don't fit." Still, I stayed. I told myself marriages go through phases, that love isn't always loud. Then there was Sophie Hartwell, the attorney. Daniel mentioned her casually at first. A client, smart, efficient, sharp as a blade, he said once, admiration slipping into his voice before he caught himself. I noticed how often her name came up, how his phone was always face down when it buzzed, how he started dressing better for late meetings. When I asked questions, he laughed them off. "You're imagining things, Lena." And I wanted to believe him, because believing was easier than admitting I was slowly being edited out of my own marriage. His family didn't help. His mother praised Sophie openly after meeting her at a fundraiser. "That woman has presence," she'd said pointedly, looking at me like I was unfinished furniture. I swallowed it all, because that's what I'd always done. I didn't realize that while I was busy being patient, loyal, and reasonable, Daniel was quietly deciding I was beneath him. And by the time I finally looked up and saw the truth clearly, he had already replaced me in his mind. The dinner at Morello's wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment the mask slipped. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment when discomfort turned into suspicion. It wasn't dramatic, no screaming, no lipstick on collars. It was the silence. Daniel started coming home later, always with a reason that sounded reasonable enough not to argue with. A client dinner that ran long, a last-minute negotiation, a crisis that only he could fix. He'd loosen his tie, scroll his phone while I spoke, and respond with distracted hums that landed nowhere near my words. I began noticing patterns, the same nights every week, the same neighborhoods, the same carefully vague explanations. And then there was his phone. Daniel had never been secretive before. We knew each other's passwords. We borrowed chargers. We answered texts for one another while driving. But suddenly, his phone was an extension of his body, always face down, always locked. If I entered a room, he'd tilt the screen away instinctively, like a reflex he didn't realize he'd developed. One night, I asked casually, "Who keeps texting you so late?" He didn't look up. "Work." Just one word. Flat. Final. That was new. His friends changed too. Mark stopped making eye contact with me. Claire became overly friendly, asking about my job in a tone that felt rehearsed, like she was compensating for something unsaid. The tension followed us everywhere. At family dinners, Daniel corrected me in public over trivial things, wine pairings, investment terminology, dates I remembered correctly, but he insisted I didn't. Each time I felt smaller, less certain, like I was slowly losing my grip on my own reality. Gaslighting doesn't always come as cruelty. Sometimes it comes dressed as confidence. The third sign arrived quietly, hidden inside our finances. I manage systems for a living. I notice anomalies. Small inconsistencies bother me. So when our joint credit card statements began showing expenses I didn't recognize, weekday lunches in upscale restaurants, hotel charges in business districts, gifts I'd never received, I paid attention. When I asked, Daniel smiled indulgently. "You're overthinking. Client meetings, networking." Networking, apparently, involved silk scarves and private spas. I started sleeping lightly, waking when he rolled out of bed to answer late-night calls in the hallway. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding, not because I knew the truth, but because my body did. The final seed was planted the night he forgot my birthday dinner. 15 years of marriage, and he lost track of time. He arrived home near midnight, smelling unfamiliar. Not perfume exactly, but something softer, warmer. When I asked where he'd been, he hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Long enough. I smiled and said nothing. But inside, something hardened. Because love doesn't hesitate like that. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself if something was wrong and started asking myself how long it had been wrong. The answers were already there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. There are moments in life that split time cleanly in two, before and after. For me, it wasn't a shocking discovery on a phone screen or a stranger's confession. It was something quieter and far more humiliating. The dinner at Morello's was supposed to be a formality, one of Daniel's relationship maintenance evenings, a chance to reassure investors, charm colleagues, and remind everyone that his life was polished, controlled, impressive, including his wife. I wore a black dress I'd owned for years, simple, tailored, comfortable. Daniel hadn't commented when I stepped out of the bedroom. He rarely did anymore. At the restaurant, he seated me slightly apart from the group, like an accessory rather than a partner. I noticed how his body angled away from mine, how his attention gravitated toward the others, especially when Sophie's name came up. I tried to focus on my food, the clink of silverware, the low hum of conversation around us, the rain streaking down the windows. Then I heard it. "Honestly, Lena's sweet," Daniel said, laughing lightly, "but she's just not on my level." The words hit me physically, like a hand pressing into my chest. I froze. He kept going. "I mean, she fixes systems. I'm closing 7-figure deals. At some point, ambition matters." Mark chuckled. Claire nodded. Someone murmured agreement. I felt my pulse in my ears. My hands went cold. My vision sharpened painfully, like the world had gone too clear. And then Sophie's name entered the conversation. "She gets it," Daniel said, softer now, warmer. Drive, success, standards. I didn't look at him immediately. I didn't need to. I'd heard that tone before. Late at night, on the phone, in the hallway outside our bedroom. Something inside me settled. Not anger. Clarity. I set my fork down with deliberate care, lifted my gaze, met his eyes. The table went silent. I reached into my handbag, slowly, calmly, and placed 2 manila envelopes between us. Daniel stared at them like unexploded devices. "Lena, what is this?" "The first envelope contains divorce papers," I said evenly. "Filed this afternoon." His face drained of color. "The second," I continued, my voice steady despite the way my heart hammered, "is the deed transfer for the house. It's being donated to charity tomorrow morning." Chaos erupted. "You can't do this," he snapped, standing abruptly. "You're being irrational." I stood too, calm, composed, terrifyingly clear. "Oh, Daniel," I said quietly. I didn't act emotionally. I acted decisively. I placed cash on the table, enough to cover my share. Then I turned and walked away. Behind me, his voice rose, panicked now. Glass shattered. Someone gasped. Control disintegrated. Outside, the rain had stopped. I took a deep breath. And for the first time in years, I realized something powerful. I wasn't losing my marriage. I was escaping it. The strange thing about detonating your own life is how silent everything becomes afterward. I didn't cry that night. I drove through the city with the windows cracked open, letting the cool air sting my face, grounding me in the reality that this was happening, that I had finally crossed a line I could never step back over. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. My breathing was controlled. My mind felt sharp, almost painfully clear. Shock doesn't always look like hysteria. Sometimes it looks like focus. The apartment downtown was exactly as I'd planned it weeks earlier. Neutral furniture, clean lines, nothing personal. I'd signed the lease through my consulting LLC, just in case. Not because I'd known for sure, but because somewhere deep down, I'd stopped trusting the ground beneath my feet. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone. Missed calls from Daniel. Texts escalating from confusion to anger to pleading. "What are you doing? You're embarrassing us." We need to talk, now. I turned the phone face down. Instead, I let the questions come, the real ones. How long had he been ashamed of me? When did love turn into tolerance? How many times had I swallowed my instincts to keep the peace? I replayed moments I'd dismissed, the subtle corrections in public, the way he'd introduce me without mentioning my work, the slight pause before saying my name, like it no longer fit his mouth. I didn't spiral. I analyzed. That's always been my strength. And the conclusion was devastatingly simple. Daniel hadn't cheated because I failed him. He cheated because success had made him arrogant, and arrogance demands validation. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. A new message. Please, just let me explain. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back. We've been explaining things away for years. I'm done listening. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. You're making a huge mistake. I felt a bitter smile curve my lips. The mistake was staying silent for 15 years. I set the phone aside and stood, pacing the apartment. My body buzzed with restrained energy, adrenaline with nowhere to go. I needed movement, structure, something familiar. The next morning, I found myself at Mike's boxing gym, the place I'd trained at for years. Sweat, leather, the honest thud of fists against heavy bags. No pretense, no performance. Mike watched me wrap my hands, his expression unreadable. So, he said finally, you blew up your marriage in the middle of dinner. Not blew up, I replied, tightening the wrap. Dismantled. There's a difference. I hit the bag hard, controlled, precise. Inside, I wasn't falling apart. I was recalibrating because grief would come later. Right now, I needed clarity. And clarity, I knew, came from information. Information has always been my refuge. When emotions threaten to drown me, I don't scream. I investigate. That afternoon, after leaving Mike's gym with my muscles aching and my thoughts finally aligned, I sat in my car across the street from Morrison Luxury Properties, watching the glass facade reflect a version of the city Daniel loved to dominate. And there he was, Ethan Morrison, exactly as I'd imagined him from Daniel's careless admiration. Tall, impeccably dressed. Silver just beginning to creep into his hair like a badge of distinction. The kind of man who smiled as if the world had never told him no. I felt nothing looking at him. No jealousy, no rage, only confirmation. I followed him at a distance, professional, methodical. He drove to Meridian Spa, one of those places that sold indulgence as self-care. While he disappeared inside, I walked the parking garage slowly, counting steps, mapping angles. His red Tesla sat alone in a corner space, protected, pampered, just like its owner. Old habits die hard. I didn't touch the car. I didn't need to. My phone buzzed. We need to talk. Daniel. I replied without hesitation. We talked for 15 years. I'm done listening. Seconds passed. Please, I can explain everything. I smiled faintly. The explanation is in your credit card statements. And your phone records. Fascinating reading, by the way. The typing indicator flickered, then vanished. You're making a huge mistake. The mistake was underestimating me. That evening, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop. Daniel thought I managed systems. What he'd never bothered to understand was that I specialized in digital forensics and security breaches. I helped corporations identify internal threats. Carelessness was my favorite vulnerability, and Daniel had married a careless man. Same password everywhere. Automatic syncing. Location services always on. Within an hour, I had access to 3 months of messages between him and Claire. Messages that weren't just about the affair. They were planning, hiding assets, fabricating emotional abuse claims, creating a narrative where I was unstable, controlling, financially manipulative. And then I saw the message that made my blood run cold. She's asking questions, Claire had written 2 weeks earlier. Maybe it's time to accelerate. Ethan's ready to make this official. Just make sure she walks away with nothing. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. They thought they were playing chess, but they'd confused silence with ignorance. I opened a new browser window and navigated to the State Bar Association's anonymous ethics tip line. Daniel's precious lawyer, Sophie Hartwell, had very strict professional boundaries. It would be tragic if someone reported that she was sleeping with a client whose property deals she was personally handling. I didn't rush. I was precise. Because escalation isn't about speed. It's about inevitability. Power doesn't feel the way people imagine. It isn't triumphant. It isn't loud. Sometimes it feels like exhaustion settling into your bones. The night everything began to collapse for Daniel, Sophie, and Claire was the same night I hit my lowest point. I didn't realize it at first. I was sitting alone in my apartment, laptop open, news alerts pinging softly, as the consequences of my actions began to ripple outward. Sophie's firm had released a carefully worded statement about internal review. Ethan's company website went dark. Claire's PR firm quietly removed several high-profile clients from their page. Phase 1 was working. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. My phone buzzed, a number I knew by heart. Daniel. I hesitated before answering. What? My voice sounded distant even to me. You've ruined everything, he said hoarsely. Not angry this time, stripped bare. My career, my reputation, my life. I closed my eyes. I didn't ruin anything, I replied quietly. I stopped protecting your lies. There was a long silence on the line. Then his voice cracked. Our daughter won't talk to me. She's embarrassed. People are whispering at her school. That hit harder than I expected. For the first time since Morello's, my composure slipped. She's your daughter, I said. She'll need time. And what about you? He asked suddenly. Do you feel better now? The question lingered between us. Did I? After the call ended, the apartment felt too quiet, too empty. I walked from room to room, touching surfaces that meant nothing, realizing how much of my life had revolved around being useful to someone who never truly saw me. I poured myself a drink, then another. And finally, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, my knees pulled to my chest, and let myself feel it. The grief. 15 years, a shared history, a version of myself that had believed patience was enough. I cried, not for Daniel, not for the marriage, but for the woman I'd been when I ignored every warning sign just to keep peace. That was my breaking point. Not rage, not revenge, acceptance. By morning, my eyes were swollen, my head aching, but my mind was clear. I couldn't undo what I'd set in motion. And more importantly, I didn't want to. Because whatever came next, I would face it as myself. Not as someone's shadow, not as an afterthought, not as a woman trying to be enough for a man who had already decided she wasn't. The worst night had passed, and something inside me had hardened into resolve. The morning after my breakdown, I woke before sunrise. No alarm, no panic, just a quiet certainty settling into my chest. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about ending the game. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee untouched, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the secure cloud server I'd set up weeks earlier. An automated alert I'd almost forgotten about. New footage uploaded. I frowned, opened my laptop, and logged in. What I saw made me go completely still. The camera angle was from the parking garage of Claire's penthouse downtown, the same building Daniel had been working late near for weeks. The footage showed Ethan's red Tesla pulling in just after 10. 20 minutes later, Daniel's replacement BMW followed. I fast-forwarded. Midnight. 1 a.m. 2. Neither car moved. My chest tightened, but not with jealousy, with clarity. Then came the clip that changed everything. Ethan and Claire stepped into frame together, laughing softly. He pulled her close, not like a friend, not like a colleague. They kissed, slow, familiar, intimate. And when they finally separated, Claire said something I could read clearly from her lips. She has no idea. I leaned back, stunned. not by the betrayal itself, but by the shape of it. Daniel thought he was in control. Sophie thought she was the strategist. But the truth was far uglier. They were all being played. The pieces fell into place with chilling precision. Claire wasn't just Daniel's confidant. She wasn't just Sophie's ally. She was running her own game, using Daniel's ambition, using Sophie's arrogance, using my presumed weakness. For the first time since all this began, I felt something unexpected, not satisfaction. Pity. Daniel had burned our marriage for a woman who didn't even respect him. Sophie had risked her career for a man already betraying her, with her best friend. They weren't powerful. They were sloppy. That was the moment I realized something crucial. I didn't need to expose everything publicly. I just needed to let the right truth reach the right people. I opened a new email account and began drafting a message to Riverside Confidential, the city's most notorious gossip outlet. I chose my words carefully. I attached select clips, nothing illegal, nothing traceable, just enough to make the story impossible to ignore. Prominent attorney involved in affair with client. PR executive manipulating narratives behind the scenes. Multiple parties planning fraudulent divorce claims. I hit send. Then I closed my laptop and exhaled deeply. The shift wasn't loud. There was no dramatic declaration, just a quiet understanding. They had underestimated the one person who knew how to connect the dots. And now the truth was about to do what I no longer needed to. Fall on them, naturally. The fallout didn't arrive like a storm. It came like an avalanche, silent at first, then unstoppable. The article broke at 6 a.m. sharp. By the time I finished my first cup of coffee, Riverside Confidential was already trending across the city's social feeds. Love triangle scandal. Respected attorney, real estate mogul, and PR executive caught in web of deception. I didn't open the article immediately. I didn't need to. My phone started ringing before I could even set it down. Daniel, Claire, unknown numbers, reporters, no doubt. I ignored them all. The only call I answered was from my daughter. "Mom," she said, her voice tight, "why are there reporters outside Dad's office? People at school are talking. What's happening?" I closed my eyes. "Listen to me carefully," I said softly. "Don't talk to anyone today. Don't answer questions. Stay with Sarah's family this weekend, okay?" A pause. "This is about the divorce, isn't it?" "Yes," I said, "but it's also about the truth." When the call ended, I sat very still. This was the cost. By noon, Sophie's law firm had issued a second statement, this one colder, sharper. She was being placed on indefinite leave pending investigation. Clients began quietly withdrawing. Years of reputation dissolved in hours. Ethan's real estate license was officially suspended. His website vanished. His social media accounts went private. The man who once strutted through rooms like he owned them was suddenly nowhere to be found. Claire's PR firm tried damage control, emergency press releases, carefully worded denials. It didn't work. Clients don't hire crisis managers who become the crisis. By late afternoon, I finally answered Daniel's call. "You did this," he said, his voice hollow. "All of it." "No," I replied evenly. "I stopped lying for you." "My family won't take my calls," he whispered. "My partners want me out. I have nothing left." I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. "That's what happens," I said quietly, "when your entire life is built on other people's silence." There was nothing left to say. That evening, I packed the last of my things from the life I'd shared with him. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I moved through the house like a guest, saying goodbye to a place that no longer belonged to her. Daniel watched from the doorway. I didn't look back, because the truth had already done enough damage. And I didn't need to stay to watch the ruins settle. The world doesn't stop after betrayal. It gets quieter. Weeks passed, then months. The headlines faded, replaced by new scandals, new villains. Sophie quietly relocated to another city. Ethan disappeared completely. Claire's firm never recovered. Clients don't trust architects of deception once the blueprint is exposed. Daniel and I finalized the divorce without drama. No courtroom theatrics, no drawn-out battles. Just signatures on paper that marked the end of a chapter neither of us could rewrite. My daughter came back to me slowly, at first with guarded conversations and cautious questions, then with long talks at the kitchen table, eventually with laughter again. Teenagers are perceptive in ways adults forget. She didn't need spin, she needed honesty, and I gave it to her. I returned fully to my work, not as a distraction, but as a grounding force. I built systems that protected people from the same kind of betrayal I'd lived through. I slept better. I breathed deeper. I stopped shrinking myself to fit into rooms where I was never meant to belong. What surprised me most wasn't the relief. It was the absence of regret. I didn't regret walking out of that restaurant. I didn't regret choosing myself. And I didn't regret letting the truth stand on its own without my protection. Here's what I learned, what I wish someone had told me years earlier. If someone is embarrassed by you, it has nothing to do with your worth. If someone needs to diminish you to feel powerful, they were never strong. And if you keep silencing yourself to keep peace, you will eventually disappear. I didn't become louder. I became clearer. And clarity is a kind of freedom no one can take from you. I don't know what comes next. I don't need to. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not living in reaction to someone else's expectations. I'm standing exactly where I belong. And that, finally, is enough.